There it is. All righty. Let me make sure that you can hear me okay still. Sometimes it cuts
Absolutely.
out. Beautiful.
Sure.
All right.
Sounds
Well,
great.
welcome to another live stream with the Apex Communications Network. If you're tuning in, we'll give it a couple of minutes to allow some people to trickle in. I know this is kind of a odd time here in the middle of the day to be going live, but my end goal is not so much for the live stream, but just for the content to be out there. Period. So we'll give it a couple of minutes and see if anybody pops in, says hi. If not, we will just continue on with our conversation.
Great.
I had a question for you. Have you been reading anything interesting while we've been on quarantine? I know you always have good books.
I have actually. I'm in the middle of James Rollin's new book. So that's James Rollin. I finished Steve Barry's recent book. Both of those I call faction type writing, historical fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually a lazy way to do some learn your history because the author does a great job doing the historical um, storyline, and then they add a usually a little adventure to it. So I've been really enjoying those books, and then picked up one of Colin Powell's leadership books and reading that right now, and tasked that as an assignment with the my officers as well, and we'll be reviewing that in the month of May.
Oh, he
On
definitely has a lot of value
He
to offer.
does, he does.
He's a lot of
Always,
unique perspectives.
he sure does. He sure does. It's a very influential leader in my career as an officer. Definitely have looked up to him and used him as for a lot of guidance in through his reading.
Yeah, I agree. Alrighty. Well, I am thinking that we will go ahead and just dive in here. So,
Great.
for those of you that are watching right now, the guest that we have with us today is a gentleman that has been my mentor now for, oh man, coming up on 3, 4 years, probably. When did
A
you take
little bit
over? When did
longer.
you assume command of FSS?
It's 2016, so
Yeah,
that'd be about
so
right.
about
That's
4 years,
hmm
somewhere around there. So, actually, initially met um, Colonel Brown here when I was still with the 179th Airlift Wing out in Mansfield. I was with them for close to 6.5 years. Just recently, actually left that organization in January 31st of this year. So I've only been a civvy, a true civvy, not just a half one, for a couple of months now. And Colonel Brown is actually a huge portion of being able to make that decision and have peace with that decision. Because for those of you that have known me for any length of time, you've known that the military has been something very deeply ingrained in my family, and then has been a part of me for a very long time. So making the decision to um, take the uniform off, which I don't really look at it that way anymore, as Colonel Brown says, I'm just wearing a uniform of a different color. Um, was something that was not taken lightly, and Colonel Brown was really able to kind of walk me through a lot of different ways to look at it, rather than just the initial um, decision that I was kind of looking at surface value, and that perspective and that ability to kind of look at things a little bit deeper than what they actually are is why I wanted to have him on with us today. Um, but I think that we should just really start with where this whole Apex concept started, because you really, I know I told you this in our little exit meeting, that you kind of started this snowball rolling down the hill in the first place, and then 3 years later, there I was sitting in your office saying, "Hey, sir, you remember that speech that we co-wrote together 3 years ago? Well, it's to a point now where it's getting a little bit uncontrollable. So, I can't take 100% of the credit for it. You kind of put yourself in this spot."
Yeah, that's all right. And yeah, and don't look at it as rolling that ball down the hill. Of course, you're still pushing it up the hill. There's a lot
Oh
of
yeah.
work that goes into it, and that you draw that same correlation over to this coronavirus at hand as we watch all these graphs and waiting for this peak or the apex as they call it. And I just encourage people not to get caught up on those peaks. As I have stated several times, the whole idea behind the apex. I once wrote, "The apex of my life is my death," and that whole point is that I will continue to progress upwards and continue to better myself until that last breath I take. And I think we need to look at that same here with this coronavirus. Instead of saying we've reached a peak, what would be the peak? What is it because we've the deaths have started to decline, the cases have started to decline. There's still a lot of work to do. There's still a lot of people on the front lines here with this. So that's why I challenge you, don't look at that as the end. Look at it as we need to continue to even work a lot harder now
Yeah.
to support all the people out there. And and it's still unknown at this time if there will ever be a true eradication of this virus. We hope someday there will be a vaccine. We hope it doesn't mutate into several other variants where we have to continue on year after year with this. But that's the point, to say, do not stop just because we hit one of these graphical peaks.
Right.
That'll be a biggest mistake if we do.
Yeah. And that's something that, I mean, these graphical peaks and this curve and, all
Hmm.
this other kind of stuff that we're consistently talking about. I think it's one of the biggest things when I was leaving the 179th, and that we kind of talked about is almost me taking a dose of my own medicine as far as that concept goes.
Sure.
And understanding, I want you to kind of explain a little bit of how you, I mean, we just recently in this conversation, you explained life as a series of chapters that
Sure.
fills out an entire storyline rather than, one conducive event that is kind of your max or your apex, as you will. Why don't we kind of walk through a little bit of that chapter concept?
Sure. Well, and I know we talked about it with your military career, and I know that it did bother you. You were concerned about ending that because you had a strong military family. But I challenge you to look at it as that chapter. You have many unwritten pages in your own personal book of life yet. Elementary school, that was a chapter. Kindergarten, break it down even further. Kindergarten, first grade,
Mm-hmm.
those were individual chapters in that elementary school. Um, Time living at home with your parents as a teenager or a youngster, that was a chapter in your life. The time you've spent with your grandparents, and maybe for many people your grandparents have passed on already, that was another chapter. So use those chapters and build on those chapters. When we started this conversation just a little bit ago, you talked about, asked me what books I'm reading currently,
Mm-hmm.
and I continue to read books. But those I use as foundations, building foundations as I continue to grow, as I continue to learn. And so not only does that add to my life, but those books are additional layers or additional chapters in my learning. Like your time in the military. That was just another chapter. And it wasn't that you closed it necessarily, but you transitioned. You took what you learned from that and you built on it. Um, and I think that to avoid the scary part of that is it happened. And if you do close it off completely, you don't want to treat it as if that that time didn't happen.
Yeah.
So that's why you need to build on that and say, this did happen. It was a chapter, and I'm going to learn from it and use it the rest of my life.
Yeah, and then that's actually a concept that I remember vividly that we worked into that Walsh commencement address. Was there's a line inside of that address that I mentioned. Um, you have this diploma, and we've talked about this multiple times in the past, that you have these physical representations of accomplishment, right? Whether it's a
Hmm.
plaque or it's an achievement medal, it's a diploma, it's a marriage license,
Hmm. Hmm.
stuff like that, because it can be achievements outside of the workplace. But it's you can either choose to take that achievement for what it is, put it up on the wall, admire it, let it get dusty, and then, 10 years from now, still talk about that achievement that's hanging on the wall. But
Hmm.
but you challenged me, and that was
Hmm.
that was a big thing that kind of started Apex really developing into a company. Was after that speech was given, you're like, okay, hey, like this happened, and you deserve to be proud of this and celebrate this, and this is going to be a part of your story for forever. But you've been given now almost like a Spider-Man-esque type of responsibility because you've been given this position. What are
Hmm.
you going to do to build on top of it?
Yes, that's right.
And that's been
Yeah,
something that's completely shaped this future moving forward.
yeah. And if you remember, I told you a story, a story of a young man still in high school, and his parents had died and left him large inheritance.
Mm-hmm.
And the in the inheritance it said, as long as that individual was in school, that the estate would pay for his living. So this individual went ahead and just stayed in school and stayed in school and stayed in school. And the story goes he made it to, he was in his 60s, and he had just a plethora of letters behind his name at that point, almost like alphabet soup behind his name. And so he was asked, well, again, that simple question: what'd you end up doing with your life? You have all these degrees. What are you doing with them? So he took advantage of his estate, got all this education, and did nothing with it.
Yeah.
But again, that degree, it was a label. Your time in the military, don't turn it into just that letter designation behind your name
The
or a
label.
certificate on your wall.
Mm.
It's exactly right. Yeah, build on that.
Yeah,
Definitely. And
because
that's all in your control.
yeah, like you said, because you gain skills throughout doing that.
Sure
I
you do.
mean, it's impossible to make it through. I mean, whether it's 60 years worth of schooling or the military career or a job or anything like
Mm,
that. There's I was just watching some Steve Harvey a couple of
mm,
days ago because I love the way his perspective on life and
mm,
him being from Cleveland and all the other kind of stuff that connects him to Ohio. But um, he was talking about the principle of basically just if you don't ask, you're not going to receive. Period. And if you don't like look at some of the whether it's a lost job or a closed chapter, quote unquote, as opportunities that you should be
mm,
going in a different direction. He's like, you can look at it one of two ways. He was talking to a gentleman that had been a computer salesman, but had gotten laid off. And so Steve looks at him and says, well, what are you trying to do now? And he's like, well, I'm trying to get another job in computer sales. And Steve was like, whoa, 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 back up. He was like, so you got laid off from a job. He's like, what are you actually passionate about? What are your God given talents? And he was like, that I love cooking. He was like, I'm phenomenal in the kitchen. He was like, so you're telling me that God has given you the opportunity to go pursue something that you're passionate about by laying you off from this position, and you're trying to go back and get another job in the same area? He was like, no wonder you haven't gotten an interview in 6 months. He was like, you still haven't learned that you need to try to move in that different direction. But taking those skills that you learned as that computer salesman and
mhm.
bringing that into the culinary world, I ended up doing a follow up and looked that gentleman up. He was able to build kind of like a online delivery food service kind of thing because he married the
Mhm.
two together. So without the computer sales job, he wouldn't have had the experience in that arena. And then without losing that position, you start to kind of extrapolate that out that a lot of those things were purposeful, but you have to choose to see them that way.
Yes. Perspective is huge in this. You and I talked even about your career. You went to college and became a clinical nurse. And I'm sure you never thought you'd see yourself behind the desk today
Yeah.
using your voice
No.
instead of maybe it's your hands and your knowledge as a nurse. Instead, you're using your mind in a different capacity now to share that knowledge with others, to share
Mm.
it in a different platform. So, and I think that applies to many of us in life. The jobs we have, we may assume, well, maybe because I'm a police officer, my job is to arrest people. But on the other side, they may not realize, change that perspective, that there's many other children that look up to that police officer and saying that individual represents honor, dignity, and for a young child out there that may be looking at that police officer, may inspire that person to be a leader as a young individual even. So there's so much of that it is about that change of perspective. Um, a story that comes to my mind about perspective. This involves a English soldier that in one of the recent wars overseas, he stepped on a landmine and basically blew off his face. They
Mm.
were able to reconstruct his face, but he was still blind after that. And he learned to adjust with his blindness, and he ended up becoming a para-Olympian and actually a gold medalist swimmer in the Olympics.
Wow.
And the story he tells that I found interesting was beyond that level of achievement. Instead of being a soldier, he was a Paralympian. Happened when he slept at night. He said when he would sleep at night, he would see again,
Hmm.
and it was just so amazing that he would sleep or that he would see. And then when he would wake up in the morning, it all ended, he became real depressed because after that dream of seeing, he woke up and realized he's still blind, and the depression would
Right.
set in. So he called his mother, and his mother says, "Son, you're looking at it all wrong. Instead of not looking forward to waking up in the morning, you need to look forward to going to sleep at night to when you can dream and see again."
Hmm.
And it was just a simple change of perspective in his life that he's living a wonderful life now because he can control that perspective, and he really focused on that power of perspective that's in each and every one of us.
Yep.
It comes back to how do we view things? How do we see life? We've seen it often described many ways. What a glass is half full, glass half empty, or
Hmm.
maybe for others it's a glass that's completely empty. Maybe for some the glass isn't there. Maybe for some the glass is overflowing.
And I know
All
that
perspective.
another interesting way that I've heard that explained is that, um, and this was brought up to me by someone in the entrepreneurial community, and it was like, most people focus on whether the glass is half full or half empty. I'm focused on what the glass is filled with. And
Okay.
because if you could have a glass half full of sewage, and that's still a glass half full of sewage. But he was like, if you
Yes.
focus on, and the other way that he brought it up too was like most people tell you to have a strong foundation. But he was like, let's back it up one more step and figure out where you're getting the concrete from.
Mm-hmm.
What is the quality of the concrete that you're using to pour that foundation? So he
That's
kind of
right.
he like challenged me to look at a lot of those, euphemisms or a lot of those sayings and say, okay, this is kind of what that cliche is.
Mm-hmm.
And his challenge was to uncliche the cliche. So he's like, find a new way to approach it. Because if this
Mm-hmm.
is, a cliche is around because it appeals to some type of human
Mm-hmm.
function, or some thought process. So he was like, what's a different way that you can approach these cliches to explain them to people in a different way? Um, Now, as we're talking about perspective here, I think this is a perfect time to bring up the man's search for meaning.
Sure.
And this is something that, I mean, we talked, what was it, last week? I think we touched base and kind of had a
Mm-hmm.
conversation.
Yes.
And so after we had that conversation, I ended up, my mom's been bringing up like little care packages and dropping them off at the door. And I had her bring me back up my copy of Man's Search for Meaning. And I've
Mm-hmm.
been rereading it
Mm-hmm.
because after we kind of talked about it, I was like, what better book to try to understand the power of
Mm-hmm.
perspective than the documentation of an experience inside of a concentration camp. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and there's two quotes that I really, I guess, got drawn towards as I was reading it. So I'll read you the first one here. We can have a discussion about that, and then we'll read the second one. But the first quote that I found was, "When we are no longer able to change the situation, we are challenged
Mm-hmm.
to change ourselves." And I think, especially in the situation that we're in right now, where a lot of people are being kind of forced out of their comfort zones, whether it's working from
Mm-hmm.
home, having to homeschool their children, not having stability in their income. There's a whole bunch of different factors that go into that instability. But what is what would you say to somebody that feels like they're unable to change the situation, but they're also
Mm-hmm.
having trouble trying to figure out, am I up to the challenge of changing myself?
All right. Well, so Viktor Frankl, Dr. Viktor Frankl, I would encourage all your listeners to get a copy of that book and read it. It's just a great read for life. This is an individual that went literally into the bowels of hell and was able to come out on the other side and be able to write about that. So, and he talked about the last thing that you give up as a human, as a person, is that ability to make a choice. He talked about free will, and as you just referenced in that quote, making that change,
Mm-hmm.
you as an individual. So, but that's up to you to make that change as an individual. So you're saying as we're going through this coronavirus in our lives is it's viewed differently, obviously, for someone that has had it. It's and maybe survived, that they went through a bad sickness. For someone else that may have lost a loved one, it's very tragic, very,
Mm-hmm.
very tragic. For a scientist, it's a maybe very difficult challenge to try to put off societal pressure to get a vaccination or a treatment for this.
Right.
So, but for the rest of the individuals that are trying to understand this, the the first key is about, I'll say, before you even get to the point of information understanding the virus, is you need to look as, are you right as an individual? I'll go back to things we've talked about in the past, and that's about your foundation.
Right.
Your foundation needs to be solid. And if you are questioning what your foundation is, we often refer to those as rocks in your life.
Mm.
What are those rocks in your life that keep you grounded? And it may be that maybe it's you have your health, maybe you have a roof over your head, maybe you have family, maybe it's you have a church family, maybe that you are able to take a breath, maybe it's you're able to eat or walk. Those certain foundations. It could be faith, could be family, could be education. And you start with your foundation because you it's very difficult to make any kind of change or accept any kind of change like the coronavirus if you have an eroding foundation.
Yeah.
So almost think about a foundation, almost like maybe like these old Greek temples, the foundation with the pillars that
Mm.
hold up a large roof. And those pillars, you have a foundation. That's your base. Your base. Uh, Again, it could be anything from your physical health to your financial situations to your. I mentioned physical, your family, spiritual health, mind, body, spirit. Think about that as your foundation. And then those pillars are, what are you holding up on that foundation? Let's talk about a a physician that's trying to work on the front lines in the emergency room right now
Mm.
and dealing with this coronavirus. Is he or she able to really focus on that job, deal with that change, if his or her foundations weren't solid? And
Right.
that foundation may be, what if he is thinking about his might be spouse, or might be his children, or, oh no, tax season's coming up. And
Mm-hmm.
if all those things are on this individual's mind, how is he or she going to be able to do the job that's required to do? So back to Viktor Frankl, back in he wasn't fighting the coronavirus. The unknown that he was fighting was, will I live or die? What
Yeah.
is going to happen to my life?
Yep.
Is it much different than the uncertainty that many people are facing today? No. So there are individuals right now that may have a compromised immune system, that they don't know if they're going to catch this virus, and if they do, they may have a risk of dying. So with that, what can they do? How can they control that change? And we've heard from the medical experts out there. Quarantine is one of the biggest ways to do it.
Right.
Isolation is another way. So there are several things, and that's part of that change. And it's a temporary change, but I think throughout all this, though, that's when I talked about the apex early in our conversation, was we don't stop there. From this point on, there will be some changes that we need to be smart about. It's how we interact with each other. It's, if you see someone coughing in public, it's not a shameful thing to ask that person to cover his or her mouth. But
Mm-hmm.
we're going to be more aware of those kind of things as we go on.
Yeah. I think that we'll discuss this now in between the two quotes because I don't want to lose the thought. but it's something important that I think that we talked about offline. The last time that we touched base was the difference in perspective between people wanting to go back to how things were versus moving forward to the way things are
Yeah.
going to be. And I,
Yes.
I, I want to explore that concept a little bit
Okay.
before we move
Good.
on to that second quote, because I think that, as you said, when we initially had that conversation, and I agree with it, is that the we're not letting the snowball roll down the hill. We're constantly trying to push it up. So if we're in this period of time and everybody's being forced out of their comfort zones, they're being forced to learn, they're being forced to adapt, discover new portions of
Mm-hmm.
themselves
Mm-hmm.
that they may or may
Mm-hmm.
not know had existed.
Mm-hmm.
Why would we want to go back to the way things were? Because it's comfortable. You
It's
know,
easy.
it's
It's
easy.
human nature. It's human nature that, and you might have, I think I mentioned this to you the last time we talked last week. I said, I think the bigger thing we're fighting in this country right now than the actual virus itself, I think is a lot of our own, whether it's carelessness, stupidity, ignorance
Mm-hmm.
to what we're being told.
Right.
And that's a bigger challenge. And I like the description that these Dr. Fauci and other physicians have talked about. They said this is not like flipping a switch that will go back to this normal.
Right.
There will be a new normal, and if so, let's look away from the coronavirus. Let's look back to 911, 9/11. All right, so we're looking at almost 20 years now, 2 decades ago almost, and there was often that same sentiment back then of, well, let's get back to normal. Well, you
Mm-hmm.
cannot get back to normal after you have two commercial airlines crash into the World Trade Center.
Yeah.
That was nothing anyone could ever conceive or imagine, and it
Mm-hmm.
happened. You
Mm-hmm.
do not go back to a point prior to that. We will always be thinking of that possibility and other possibilities. Likewise, with the coronavirus, those simple things I mentioned, our ears are going to be perked up, our eyes are going to be watching for those individuals out there. If someone is coughing out in public, we're going to probably turn the other way,
Yeah.
or again ask them to cover their mouth if they're not covering their mouth, for example. But I think simple things. How many times we've been told since we were children, wash your hands with soap and water?
Right.
And how many people have gotten away from that and said, this won't affect me. I live dirty. It's not a problem. It builds my
Yeah.
immunity.
Yeah.
So it's all of a sudden now you see there's a change. These kind of changes will be commonplace, I think, as we move forward. But there's also things that we don't know right now. There's new startup companies. Mark Cuban, the owner of the Dallas Mavericks, was talking about that the other day one of the outcomes, or many of the outcomes, but one of them is going to be that there are going to be some startup businesses. Yes, there will be businesses that are closed probably forever, and that is tragic. Yet at the same time, there's going to be new opportunities created, whether it's in the biotech industry, whether it's even how individuals interact with each other. Look, for example, a lot of these restaurants doing this curbside pickup. Well, or even a lot of people teleworking now. If
Right.
if you can create that and add that as a tool to your business, that may change the way we do business forever. It may work for some. So there's there are things we don't know yet that will come about as from this virus and the change. Some of the change, again, perspective. Some of the change to some may be bad, but I think for many of us, I think we're looking at the positive side, the glass is half full, and saying there's going to be a lot of positive opportunities. We will learn a lot from this.
And that's what I really want people to try to focus on
Hmm.
is the opportunity to learn. You know, anytime you get put in a position where you're stuck between a rock and a hard place,
Hmm.
right? You're either just lay there and let the rock suffocate you, or you try to figure out an innovative way to fix the fact that you're stuck between this rock and a wall. You know,
Yes.
um, and that's something that they say that pressure is the mother of all innovation. Or that tragedy is the mother of all innovation. And that's something that I'm really trying to look at right now. I guess personally, trying to keep myself afloat from a mental perspective is with all of the stuff going on, because I'm kind of in this weird pivot area where I'm feeling the pressure from the entrepreneurial community. I'm also in the healthcare field. I'm close enough that I'm still discussing a lot of the militaristic stuff and feeling,
Mm-hmm.
those people are venting to me because I'm a trusted confidant to them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so being able to kind of see it from almost a full topographical map type of,
Mm-hmm.
perspective, has really kind of forced me to think about, okay, how do I gain any type of positivity out of this? And the only thing that I could continue to come back to is that we either learn from things and discover new portions of ourselves, innovate, and move towards this new normal, or push towards this new, better version of society,
Mm-hmm.
or we can stay put and either complain, suffer, and just deal with the pain.
That's you're right, and so let's talk about what can an individual do to control and maybe change that negative feelings or bad feelings or the scary feelings they're having. One of the things we're watching, and I caution people watching the news because there's, in many cases, the news wants to show the drama,
Mm.
the front lines. We know it's bad what these doctors and nurses and these hospital workers are going through on the front line. But it's not just them. It's gas station attendants, it's truck drivers, it's grocery store workers, it's social workers, it's anyone that's going to be having contact. It's the police officers, the firefighters, the EMS. So we know that.
Mm.
So do you want to sit there and focus on that side of this whole coronavirus, or take it to the other side and say, this is the part I could do for change? Maybe, and I've seen many doing this already. It doesn't have to be just a church to do this. But what about outside that hospital that you have sack lunches ready for those medical workers when they come off? There's nothing stopping you from going down to the fire department and sending them having a pizza delivered, or even the EMS or the police. There are so many ways that you can help these individuals out and support them. It's not necessarily that you can go into a grocery store and take over for that grocery store worker, but is there something that you can give them in a way of hope? And that is the positive side of this change that you can do. And that'll, once you talk about that snowball, it takes work. It's like pushing that snowball at this point in time up that proverbial hill.
Yep.
But at some point, when you have a whole bunch of people behind it, it gets easier to push that.
Right.
And that changes that whole focus on how this looks, is saying we are in it. That to me, that's been the beauty of this country. And I think back to World War II.
There we go. I
So
was about to say, like, let's explore
let's
that mentality post World War, or during World War II.
sure, sure. And World War II, we did not focus on. Let's refer back to D-Day. We didn't have the media focusing on the gross side of this, the tragedy, the suffering, how many the soldiers getting shot. We knew that was a reality. We knew that was happening. We knew that our men and women were dying in these terrible battles.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, what we were doing over here is uniting as a country, uniting, and we had children, we had families going out and doing uh, uh, rubber for rubber. They rubber, glass, plastics, anything that they can gather to support the war mission, because the
Right.
war mission was the country mission,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what saved the other lives. It's and so what do you let's go back to present day. What can you do even if you don't have the virus? What can you do? Well, isolation. We talked about the community spread. If I'm going around all the time in these stores and not caring, I could be a carrier of this thing and keep
Right.
passing this on and on and on. So it's we can do our part, all of us, and that is that model out of the 1940s. Now let's go back to the 40s and the war. The war ended in 45, and then the 50s tended to be a pretty positive period in the country, positive in the sense of large growth, um, family values, morals, a positive period. I've heard some on talk radio suggests that after we come out of this, there may be a period because the country united during the war. We
Mm.
may come out of that as a stronger country united, caring for your neighbors, and you may see some more of that. Maybe prior to this virus coming on, we thought, hey, everything's fine. I could just take care of myself and everything's good. So that idea of that isolation selfishness, now we're turning into it's not just about me. This is bigger than me. And if we want to be as strong, let's start as a neighborhood. Let's start as a city. Let's start as a state. Then let's unite as a country. And
Right.
when we do that, you will see it's logarithmic how it expands. And I again, that's a positive perspective on this, but it's also just a perspective period. How you can do that change, going back to Viktor Frankl, he's in the bowels of hell. How can he? And if you remember in the story, what helped him get through that was, you remember he had images and thoughts of his wife.
Hmm.
He would concentrate. He had no idea that his wife had already uh, died in the camps, but for him, it brought him comfort. It brought him a lot of comfort
Yeah,
as he moved on.
there was that, and then there was one other thing that outside of the his wife that I think that is worth mentioning in especially in this. And I know that um, there's a group that one of the guys inside the innovation district started. That's basically like an anti-COVID-19, I guess, but it's humorous. It's meant to be like we're joking about the situation. We're trying
Hmm.
to keep the mood light and talking about
Hmm.
pretty much anything except for COVID,
Hmm.
and at least poking fun at it. But one of the quotes that I'm going to kind of throw in the mix here is that it is well known that humor, more than anything else in the human makeup, can afford an aloofness and the ability to rise above any situation, even if it's
Sure,
only for a few seconds. And
sure.
I remember a good section of the book. I haven't gotten to it again yet, rereading it, but he talks about the fact that even though people were dying on a daily basis in the concentration
Hmm.
camps, and these
Hmm.
people were looked at not even human, subhuman,
Yeah,
you're a barcode. That humor was still present within any group of people that gathered together, and that it gave them,
sure,
even if it was just a few seconds, the
sure.
temporary relief and able to feel hopeful with a group. And I think that that's something important to
Hmm.
remember as we're kind of navigating these uncertain times, is that we have this, luckily we have these technological capabilities to get together, and
Hmm.
play Cards Against Humanity with your friends, or
Hmm.
to have a
Hmm.
virtual happy hour or something like that. And that humor and that ability to laugh with your close friends and family is something that can bring a whole lot of light into somebody's life. So if you know somebody, if you're listening to this and you know somebody that you haven't reached out to in a little while, um, reach out to them. Say, hey, let's hop on a FaceTime call, have a beer,
Sure.
and just talk and laugh about things, talk about memories, and you'd be surprised how much health and wellness that can bring to somebody's mentality.
You are so right. I was listening to a counselor just it was probably a couple weeks ago, and she mentioned the fact that even though we are doing this, whether you call it social distancing or physical distancing, it doesn't mean that it has to be a physical and social isolation. We are humans. We need interaction. We need to have contact, whether
Yeah.
it's just through a FaceTime, whether it's through standing in the doorway. Look, I saw something on the news the other day. A lady, and I believe if I remember right, she was in Pittsburgh, standing in her doorway, holding a sign that says, "I need beer."
Hmm.
That that is still funny. She's in her 90s. She's holding a can of beer in one hand and a sign in the other. But, but and
Oh man.
but that goes back to that laughter and the whether it's laughter, whether it's music, and I think those are the two common things that we tend to see across the world. Whether it's a cellist that's performing online for anybody who wants to watch, whether it's someone singing on his balcony. Um, Even in this country, when we had our dark times,
Mm.
that's when vaudeville was very popular.
Mm.
Theater, make you laugh. That is that is the whole idea of yes, we recognize dark times. We're not we're not ignoring that these times are dark, but at the same time, we still need to pick each other up, and we do need to do our We can do things to move on.
Right.
And it gets very difficult if all you focus on is the news. And think about us as a human person as we watch daily. Here comes the numbers. In Ohio, it's every day at 2 o'clock is the governor's briefing. And what do they start with?
Wine
Here's
after
the
wine.
numbers.
Yep.
So you don't, and I caution people, don't focus on the numbers because the numbers represent lives. Everything goes back to life.
Mm.
So don't treat it as a number. Don't look at it as a number and focus on change of perspective. Focus on what you can control right now, and there's nothing stopping you from getting into contact and spreading a little bit of joy.
Yeah, I think that there's one of the gentlemen that was a guest on the Apex. He's going to be hopping on some live streams. I think next week more than likely. But his name's John Dietz, and he's always kind of been the I guess he's the you that I have closer contact with in Canton. You know,
Okay,
um, but he has something that he says. Kindness is free, and it only takes 7 to 12 seconds to change someone's day. Or 7
very
to 12
positive.
seconds to if you take that out, he really firmly believes that it only takes 7 to 12 seconds to change someone's life, because you have no idea
Mhm.
what that person is going through on a daily basis, and your smile and reaffirmation that their haircut looks good may be something that brightens their day to the point that they choose not to do something horrible that day.
That's right. That's
And
right.
he firmly believes that, and I am on the same page as he is. So we'll move into this second quote here. Um, and this is another quote from Viktor Frankl.
Mhm.
And it kind of we've almost already kind of addressed it in our conversation, but I think it's still worth bringing up. So it says everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, and to choose one's own way.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. And uh, you don't have to be a person of faith to understand what he just said, but I will mention that as a person of faith, that one of the greatest gift God did give us was that free will.
Mm-hmm.
You are the one to make the choice. This is nothing that religion is not forced on you. You get to
Right.
choose. If you choose to believe in God, that's your call. So that's that free will. That is the same thing Viktor Frankl was referencing. It got down to that point where he was in the labor camp and he's working, and at any given time on any one of those marches, he could have given up. He could have given up. He That was a choice. And when he talks about the lowest form, getting down to that lowest point of life, the Jewish people were a very proud people, and it wasn't just by title; it was by name, it was by what they had worked for. In this case, he was a doctor, um, and all these things he was stripped down, not only figuratively but literally stripped down. They were tattooed, they were marked, and so they didn't even have their name. The last thing that we have as an individual is our name. And at that
Mm-hmm.
point, the lowest of low, and around all that death, he still was able to have that choice. That was the thing they couldn't take from him. They
Right.
could shave your head, take your hair, cut your arm off, whatever it was, but they couldn't take his ability to choose.
Exactly.
And that will be going. I said perspective, how you view your life, we need to carry with us, but never ever lose that, and always know that you as an individual, man, woman, black, white, tall, short, it doesn't matter. That's the thing that each one of us have that binds us, is that ability to make a choice.
Yes.
We have free will. That's right. And I'm going to transition. I'm going to take that quote about free will, and I'm going to still talk about this coronavirus and how we view that. There was and I'm going to throw a quote back your way, and this was from a Russian American. She was a writer, philosopher. The name, and I hope I don't butcher her first name, Ayn Rand, Ayn Rand, Rand. And she said, we can evade reality, but we cannot evade the consequences of evading reality.
Wow, that's deep.
I think it's so applicable to this time is
Wow,
and I
that
remember
is.
I mentioned
There's a
remember earlier
lot
I
of layers
mentioned
to that.
there's a lot of layers. That's right. So I mentioned earlier about this whole how we view this and say this doesn't impact me. I'm sitting in my home. I'm safe. I'm healthy. So I could ignore this. I could just completely say this isn't affecting me. But what you cannot ignore are the consequences. What's happening right now. That
Right.
is real. I cannot see it, but this thing does exist. This is real. And it goes deeper than the economy. When it starts affecting lives, this is where this is real.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I
yeah,
think that
definitely.
that quote, I'm gonna copy, I'm pasting that into the comments here so that people can see that. Um, but we can ignore reality, but we cannot ignore the consequences of ignoring reality.
Yeah, yeah.
There's I mean, my brain is going in like 1,500 different directions right now, but that thought process in general, early on when all of this kind of started, we started really feeling that like PPE shortage, you know, or the potential of a steep upward curve, at the beginning of all of this coronavirus stuff in the state of Ohio when we first started enacting these sanctions, like March 12th or March 10th. Um, the amount of people that because I had been coordinating with distributed bio since like January, so I had been trying to predict the writing on the walls ever since I saw that it was in China, and I figured at some point it was going to cross over and come hang out with us here in the States. But it was really surprising to me the number of people that held their hands over their eyes as it was starting to get closer and closer. Like it entered the country and then it entered the state, and it's in our that's not our problem. That's a New York City problem. That's not something that we're going to be affected by. That's large cities with dense populations. Um, and ignoring the reality of the fact that it was a novel disease. It is a novel disease, and that we have to enact something, in order to mitigate it. And then when that acceptance finally started to set in, feeling off put by the consequences of not enacting things earlier on, or saying that we overreacted and now we're not seeing a steep spike. So people are assuming that it was a conspiracy theory to begin with. And my whole thing is like, that means that we're doing a good job, everybody. That if you're listening to this and you're wondering, why are we not seeing the COVID numbers that we are expecting? Why do they keep pushing the timeline back? I know that that's something that's really frustrating people is they keep saying, oh, the peak is going to be next week or the peak's going to be the week after that. And like you're saying, we shouldn't be focusing on when that peak is.
No,
It's
no.
going to be this change over a period of time, and we just have to accept reality for what it is and adjust using rational thought on a day-to-day basis, week by week basis, and then adjust society moving forward. But if we choose to ignore that reality that this is a disease that is fundamentally going to change the way that our society is structured, we can't choose the consequences.
That's right. And I think that the deciding factor here is this about me or is this about us as a whole?
There
So
we
this
go.
is if this were how many people say I want to see baseball again? Well, daggone it, I'd like to listen to a good baseball game too.
Yeah, I was
But
just
at the
talking to
cost of
my buddy yesterday about Tom Hamilton and just missing that
yeah,
voice on the radio.
but at what cost?
Yeah.
At the risk of getting back in so we can be close to each other that we do not have this under control yet. Why am I saying this? Is because I trust the scientists out there
Mm.
and I need to listen to scientists. And sure, it's easy for us in Ohio to come back and start being negative towards Dr. Acton, and I think she's done a wonderful job under immense pressure that put all these guidelines in with the governor. And I know people don't like them. Some people don't like them, but I do believe they did keep us safe. And I'm going to listen to someone that is much smarter about this virus than the rest of the 11, 12 million people in Ohio, and
Right.
we do need to listen. I'm gonna add another quote that's I think applicable here, and you've heard the quote "knowledge is power,"
Mm.
and I think I've talked to this with this too with you before, but
Ciencia potestas est.
I
Mm.
changed that around to say knowledge is not power; it's the practical application of that knowledge that is power. So
Amen.
go back to that young person I told you that got all that college education and never used it.
Right.
Zero power. So let's focus on, let's take that knowledge, and this goes into innovation too. And what are we going to come, how are we going to come out of this?
Hmm.
Practical application of this knowledge now that people have, whether it's a business owner, whether it's you that is using your voice to reach people. Do
Right.
you want to take, again, you and I talked about it, how which path did you want to take? You came to a fork in a road.
Right.
And that's another one of mine. Yeah, you've heard me tell you that one. Come to the fork
Hmm.
in the road. You can do like Yogi Berra, pick it up, or are you gonna do like I say, create your own time.
Yeah.
You took
Yeah.
a different route. You're not following of the major news networks and trying to say, here's the same old, and here's what's happening.
Right.
You're saying, I'm going to use my voice to get a positive message out. Let's look at this a little bit differently. Let's take what we know and we could take historical context and build on that. And that was a choice, Viktor Frankl, and that was a perspective you decided to take on, like that English soldier. And you have a practical application of your knowledge of this business that you're using in this platform,
Mm.
that foundation to build on it to get this message out.
Yeah. And
So I
that
applaud you
concept
for
is
that.
like, I appreciate that a lot. I mean, and it's been a blessing having the people in my life that have things to say that are worth hearing to bring them on these types of shows. Because if it was just me up here monologuing all the time, it'd be probably get pretty boring. But I've been blessed to have the encounters in my life, and the more I think about it, the more I realize that every single one of these people was purposely placed in my life. And it's all kind of coming together, especially now.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's mentors, my grandfather and everything that happened with him in my early high school days, all of the, now that I'm out of the service, I'm able to talk a little bit more openly about my experiences in borderline juvenile detention and that type of stuff as a kid. But like I used to struggle with all of those different experiences, and it's to why I had to go through them. But like you said, with this whole knowledge is power, and that concept is we can take that back biblically. I mean, it's an ancient idea
Mm-hmm.
as far as human
Mm-hmm.
nature, and I know that the one parable that I always kind of relate that back to is the talent or the gold coins and burying them in the garden. God gave,
Mm-hmm.
or the parable of a master giving sections of his wealth to three different servants, and saying, I'm going to go off. I want you to take this and do with what you will with it. And one person buried it, and the other two utilized the talents that they were given to make that multiply. And the master came back and said, I gave you this, and the only thing you did was bury it in the sand. I gave you this amazing gift,
Mm-hmm.
and you didn't even acknowledge it. You just put it in the ground. And I've been challenging people a lot that on that a lot lately, where I'm saying, people are afraid to be with themselves sometimes. I think that people are afraid to just shut off the computer, to shut off Netflix, turn off the music, and just sit there and let themselves think, or let their minds wander. And I'm challenging people to do that right now and do a little soul searching.
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying this is a time in your life that you may never get this amount of alone time
Mm-hmm.
ever again. So, whether you're 18 years old or you're 90 years old, take this time to reflect,
Mm-hmm.
and try to see what are these innate things that I'm really good at, and am I using them to the greatest of their capability for the greatest benefit of those around me?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer to that may not be comfortable, because you
Mm-hmm.
may come to realize that you have a lot of things to offer the world that you've chosen, or over a period of time, people have told you no so many times that you just have decided that it's not worth showing the world. And so if you're listening to this and you're experiencing that right now. I'm challenging you to show the world, because now is the time more than ever that we need to see that light.
Definitely, definitely. It is a time of opportunities. It is a challenging time, but it's also a time of opportunities. We have been given an opportunity. As you were talking about this, I think of the news stories, and again, I shouldn't paint this with a broad brush, but they tend to show I'll say the woe is me type stories.
Mm,
Look how difficult this is. This is terrible. But how many people have come to me and told me the stories of, we're at the dinner table now instead of on a traveling team, that eating our family meal out of a sack that we picked up through a drive-through,
mm,
living out of a hotel. We are now sitting as a family with a meal that we cooked, and then we played dominoes after
right.
dinner, or we read. And many of these families are turning off the television, and they're spending family time. They're creating new ideas, new things to do. They're planting seeds with their children
Yeah.
in the home, and then with the plans to transplant them into a garden, and then to take that growth, whether it's a fruit or a vegetable,
Mm,
and give it to a neighbor. So this is families are taking these opportunities, this challenge, and turning it into a positive opportunity. And you can't say enough about that. So again, go back to choice. Do you want to say, woe is me and this is terrible and I'm just going to live in fear? Or are you going to make that choice, as Viktor Frankl talked about, and take control and build on your foundation and challenge yourself? Call a neighbor. What can I do? It The lady that's a seamstress now is making masks.
hmm.
Great. General Motors, Ford, they're making ventilators. Those workers had no intention. They were making cars, for goodness sakes.
Right.
This is just the way we're doing it right now. It's temporary. For some companies, maybe they'll change forever. But there are so many things that we can be doing, and there are some families that are doing, that are very positive in this challenging time. And I do think that we are going the right way as a country.
Yeah, I agree. And for those of you that are listening that are from Stark County, I know specifically, I will post a link in the comments to a group called Stark County Community Cares. It's a great online Facebook community right now that's trying to coordinate resources, as far as like lists of elderly people that need groceries delivered, list of food banks, lists of restaurants that are currently open for takeout, and so on and so forth. So I will make sure that I post that in the comments. For those of you that are just tuning in, we are having a conversation with Lieutenant Colonel Phil Brown. Um, and he a great mentor of mine, and been personally involved with the Apex for a long time. So we spent a lot of the conversation talking about Viktor Frankl perspective on coronavirus, and now we're kind of moving into, the state of the state of the country, and that I do believe that we are on, like you said, the right track, um, with the companies that are pivoting. And when you mentioned World War II the last time we talked, I went back and I looked at
Mhm,
all of the different initiatives that have war bonds, rubber drives,
mhm, mhm,
scrap drives, pretty much literally anything and everything. And whether the it takes a nation mentality,
mhm.
and whether somebody had the ability to donate a penny or $100 million, every single piece of the puzzle was appreciated and needed at the time. And so I want to kind of spark this last piece, which is going to probably kind of lead into your final monologue here. But if you're listening and you're not an essential worker, right? You've been struggling with feelings of uselessness, or like you can't contribute whatsoever, or you're not having, any role to play, and you're seeing all of these people that are posting signs and that are actively out in the community, that are truck drivers, gas station clerks, grocery stockers, um, cashiers, healthcare workers, frontline operators. And you see all of these people out doing things and you feel as if you have nothing to contribute. I promise you that your effort in socially distancing, trying to manage the fact that you're laid off, and you're trying to manage paying your bills, trying to feed your family, all of those important things that make life continue moving forward, I promise you that your contribution is appreciated and noticed, whether you think so or not. That's kind of my message to everybody listening.
That's a positive message, and that is correct. There's opportunities. And it may be, again, we maybe had a certain job, whether it was that General Motors worker I talked about that thought he was going to build cars or trucks and now is building ventilators.
Mm-hmm.
It may be someone who's laid off right now, but you could drive around anywhere, and I still look in the ditches and you can see trash. Is there any problem with picking up trash and cleaning up your community?
Yeah,
So it could even be something like that that brings about positive change.
which is still a great
Uh,
way to socially distance and get outside
and
too.
exactly, yeah, you're outside. There's a lot you can do. There's nothing stopping any individual from contacting their village administrator, their county commissioners, and saying where is a need?
Mm.
Where is a need out here? Is there a need? Maybe it's mowing a lawn because maybe a YMCA is closed down and they need the place taken care of. There's how about daycare workers that are working, taking care of the children of the essential employees? Maybe it's providing meals for them.
Mm.
Maybe that because of those workers working 12-hour shifts, they're not able to do things around their house. We don't know what all exists until we start asking. But there's many things that we can do and still be safe as we move along in this. But it's the thing that'll hurt us most though is if we sit idle, if we just sit by and be that armchair quarterback that doesn't help
Mm.
anybody out. It's going to make you as an individual negative. Um, I challenge you to turn off the news, and actually open the door, open the window, look at the birds, look at the flowers coming up, and that is one thing that after every tragedy and is in the history, at least of modern man, and we can go back thousands of years here, but every spring life begins again.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. I think that that's a perfect place to kind of end things. So, for those of you that have been listening, I appreciate you joining us. It looks like we've had a little over 40 people over the last hour pop in and out, and I'm sure that there'll be more that watch this after it's uploaded to YouTube. So, as always, Apex Chasers, I appreciate you coming to hang out with us today. I know Colonel Brown was looking forward to coming on and hanging out with you guys and offering up some of his wisdom to us as listeners. So, Colonel Brown, I definitely appreciate you um, coming back on. And as always, being a mentor that's there when I'm getting to the point where I feel like I'm going to snap in half. I always know that I can call you and kind of get a little bit of perspective and solace moving forward. So you're always much appreciated, sir.
Now, thank you for the kind words.
Alrighty. Well, until next time, guys, we will see you.